This client brought us slabs that her grandfather planted on the family farm, so we only had one chance to get this table right. The first step with these slabs is to try and get them flat so that we can get them laid out into their shape for the mold. And as you can see when they were sitting down on the CNC table, these pieces are extremely warped. They probably weren't cut or dried the best, but because of the sentimental value these pieces have, we have no choice but to try and yield what we need out of them. Apparently, these were some slabs of walnut, which is hard to tell by looking at them in their rough state. We're pretty sure that they ended up being English walnut because it didn't have a lot of that typical rich dark brown walnut color that you usually see from, let's say, black walnut or Claro walnut. These pieces mostly ended up having sapwood, but down the middle there was a strip of some nice, more rich heartwood, which to me kind of looked like English walnut. But if we've got some walnut experts in here, maybe you guys can let us know what your guess is on what species of walnut these slabs are. So we cut them to their rough size so that they'll fit in the mold, and then it's back onto the CNC machine so that we can get these pieces flat enough to a state where they're able to be poured with resin. Typically we make sure we get both sides of the slabs completely flat, but because of how warped these pieces are, we didn't really have an option but to leave one side with a little bit of rough on them. When we encounter slabs that are warped like this, we usually choose to flatten the top side perfectly so that we don't have any excess resin left on the top surface, or at least not as much excess resin left on the top surface. When it comes to the bottom, we can get away with having that resin on the underside because it's never really going to be seen. I mean, unless these clients spend a lot of time under their table, that is. And this table is also getting a solid black base layer. So any of that black resin we pour for the base layer, it's just going to go underneath the voids on those slabs and fill in the excess areas. Another tip that I can offer when you do have rough left on slabs and you have no choice but to leave it is to actually make sure that you're sanding out those saw marks, because in the case, let's say that some of that rough ends up on your top surface, you don't want to see, let's say, chalk lines, bandsaw marks, chainsaw marks, anything like that on your surface. You want to make sure you have a nice sanded surface beneath that resin. What this also does is, I found, it gets out a lot of the debris that can be trapped in those saw marks. So even if you plan on machining it all off after, we've had it happen before where we do a clear pour, we don't clean off the saw marks, and then you get like this brown residue that comes off of those saw marks. Once we've got the slabs completely cleaned up and upstairs into the pour room, it's time to start mixing up the resin for the base layer. So we're using our Black Forest deep resin for this pour. Even though it's only going to be about ½ an inch thick, you do get a much stronger bond by using a deep resin as opposed to using a quicker curing resin meant for thinner pours. Deep resins typically have a lower viscosity, which is going to allow them to soak more into the edge of the wood, and they also have a slower cure time, which is going to allow for a longer time period for them to soak into the edge of the wood. So once we've mixed up our opaque black resin, we can then begin pouring it into the mold. And there's no real right or wrong way to pour. We do try to pour as slowly as we can to reduce any excess bubbles that are created during this pour, but the nice thing about our deep resin is that it's formulated to release all of the bubbles on its own, so even if you accidentally create some air bubbles during the pour, they're all going to come to the surface and pop. After we had poured the base layer, it was time to pour the top layer, and this day we actually had a TV crew coming in to film for us, so I can't mention anything about this yet, but we will be coming up soon in some kind of a series where you're going to get to see some of our builds in a different setting on a different platform. Kind of. And then once we're demolded, we can get this piece lifted downstairs with our forklift and onto the Avid CNC machine for flattening. With all of our pours, we leave an excess layer of resin on the top side, and that's so that we can try and fill in all the cracks and voids in a single shot. It does cost a bit more money because we use the extra resin, but being that we have large overhead costs, and for us, it ends up being cheaper to spend a little bit more on the resin than having to spend all that extra labor filling in all the cracks and voids at once. There still is some fills that happen afterwards, but it's much reduced by doing the pour this way. Then once we've got that layer removed, we're staying on the CNC machine, and now we're using it to cut this piece round. So this is a process that you can't really make in a single cut. We do have to take multiple passes to safely do this without breaking a bit or even risk chipping out the resin on the side of the table. And I speak from experience, we've had that happen before. Fortunately, we were able to fix it, but if you take too much too quickly, you can really cause some damage to your piece or your machinery. Another thing that you'll notice is we purposely didn't go all the way through with the CNC machine. We left a really thin layer so that we can get this piece lifted off and then use a flush trim router bit to remove everything. And again, this is just to try and reduce the chance of getting any chip out when taking that bit through the top and puncturing through the underside of the table. Once the piece has been cut to size, we can then begin laying out for the custom pocket that's going to fasten the X-base to the underside of this piece. So we couldn't really do our typical plate design where we have small square plates on the top of each vertical pillar of the X-base. We had to do a big ring that would mount to all those pillars because our mounting places where we needed to hit wood ended up being in between where the arms of those X-bases are. That's what you're seeing us do here now. It's a 6mm deep recess to fit the 6mm thick plate. And then we're sanding this piece up to 320 grit to prepare it for the finish that's going on. This client has selected the urethane finish, so we still sand to the same grit as an oil finish. It's just we don't do that here in our shop. We send this off to another shop to apply that 2-component acrylic urethane. The only, I guess, perceived downside of this finish is that it does build up more of a layer over the wood, so you do lose some of the tactile experience in terms of feeling the pores of the wood grain, but the benefits that it offers come with the durability. So unlike the oil finish, this finish is impervious to nearly all liquids. I think it's even rated against sulfuric acid, which I'm sure most customers are never going to spill on their table, but in the event that happens, you know they're covered. And it just gives a really nice, beautiful, even finish to the piece. While we wait for the urethane finish to cure on the top, we can begin working on the X-base that I mentioned earlier. Like most of our X-bases that you see, we're constructing this base using solid ash, and we start off using 3-inch thick material. So it's quite a hefty, chunky base, but we always like to over-engineer our components to ensure that we're going to have the optimal stability and structure out of our tabletops that we're looking for. Once everything has been cut down to its rough size, we can then get them over to the CNC machine to cut them to their final size, and also machine out some of the joinery that's going to allow all these pieces to be fastened together. To assemble the components for the X's, we drill holes using our CNC machine, and then we're using Titebond 3 with solid wood dowels to assemble everything together. And then also similar to most of the X-bases that we do, this client has requested the black and finish. So we like to use the General Finishes black wood stain, and we're not sponsored by them, but we do sell their products. So if you want to pick it up, you can find it on our website. And from all the black stain products that we've tried, this product does the very best job at achieving an even finish without too much effort. A lot of the other black stain products are very unforgiving in that if you don't quickly apply over your entire surface, you can get these ugly lap areas, and it just leads to a really ugly, uneven finish. So with the General Finishes, we just brush it on with the foam brush, we buff it off, we let it cure for at least a week before applying the clear oil over top, and it works really, really well. Then once the finish on the base is cured, we can come along and put on that steel ring that I talked about earlier. So this is a laser cut ring. We ordered this from another steel shop and had it machined to our exact requirements to make sure it's going to fit on the underside of the tabletop. And then we can get everything laid out, pilot hole some holes in the top side of our base so that we can use wood screws to assemble that plate. And then we're machining some corresponding holes on the underside of the tabletop, but instead of using wood screws like we did to assemble the plate onto the base, we're using threaded inserts. And this is going to give our client the ability to disassemble and reassemble their table as many times as they need over the life of the piece without stripping out any of the holes. Now, something else that I didn't mention earlier that you're probably seeing and I should mention now is 2 of the pieces in this table are broken. They were too warped and we couldn't get the thickness we needed out of them, so we physically snapped them in half and then assembled everything back together using resin, and it still allows us to get this nice continuous piece while maintaining the thickness that we require. Then, as a final step for durability, we're applying 2 coats of our Black Forest ceramic coating. Specifically this time we're using the sprayable graphene. This graphene coating is originally designed for exterior use to protect wooden furniture on yachts, so it is more than qualified to protect your interior furniture. It makes the whole surface hydrophobic. It's going to ensure that it's much more scratch resistant and overall just give you a better product. And then after all this time, it's time to finally get this piece delivered into our client's beautiful home. So I can only imagine how cool this is for them, you know, having our client's grandfather plant this tree all that time ago, and to now have it delivered into their home as an heirloom piece of furniture. It's probably so satisfying, and it's an honor that they've picked us to do this for them. So the first step is to get the X-Base lifted into the home, which isn't too bad because it's not too heavy. We just have to be kind of careful not to hit our head on the light, which we have done many times before. Fortunately, we've never broken a light though, surprisingly. Then we can get the top lifted in and begin getting the protective wrapping removed. And then we have to figure out where we had the top placed on the corresponding side of the base. Fortunately, as you can see, we had a little tape mark. But even though everything was laser cut, it's just always a good idea to make sure you're putting your tabletop back on the same way in case something doesn't quite line up perfectly. Now, something else really special that happened here while we were delivering this piece is the clients actually kind of started to tear up a little, and they were hugging each other, and you could just tell it was a really important moment for them. And obviously we didn't stick a camera in their face while all of this was happening, but again, I just want to say how big of an honor it was that this trust was bestowed upon us to work with these pieces that were clearly so important to them. And I'm just happy that these clients are going to get to live with this for the rest of their life and hopefully pass this on to the next generation in their family.
That's in. I can't see. We're going to need to lift it up.
Yeah, let's just tilt it a bit. Here's a hole.
Yep.
So we gotta rotate counterclockwise.
Counterclockwise?
Yep.
Okay. More.
Just tell us when.
Yep.
Right. Stop.
Still gotta spin a bit.
And to recap, we've constructed this table using what we think is English walnut supplied from our client's farm that was planted by their grandfather. We've done a solid black base layer with a clear top layer using our Black Forest deep resin. We've done an acrylic urethane finish on the top that we've protected using our Black Forest sprayable ceramic coating, and the X-Base is constructed from solid blackened ash with a blackened steel top plate, and then finally to top everything off there's a little pewter brand on the underside of the table. Please let us know what you guys think about this piece in the comments below, and let us know if you think we did these slabs justice.
Alright.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. Thank you guys for trusting us with this. This is awesome. Kind of an honor for us to get to let them live on.
We appreciate it.
Absolutely.